Hello, welcome, and most importantly, congratulations on deciding to learn a new skill and diving into the world of Android app development. Learning Android is really like anything else. The job can be made easier with the right tool. Our primary tool will be the Android Studio IDE. Android Studio is the official IDE for Android application development and was released back in 2014, starting at version 1.0. Since then, multiple updates have been released, with the most current version at the time of this recording as version 4.1.2. Now, while the Java programming language was Google's preferred language for Android app development and can still be used today, recently Google adopted the Kotlin programming language as its primary language and preferred language for Android app development. So we are going to work solely in Kotlin for this course. Kotlin is designed to interpolate fully with Java, which means they can essentially operate together. This is great because Java is an older, well-supported, and highly functional language, and Kotlin can work right alongside any pre-written Java code. And yes, semicolons are optional. So in order to use Android Studio, even though we're going to write all our code in Kotlin, we need Java installed on our computer. You can sort of think of it as Kotlin works on top of Java. Now, we can go and install the Java Development Kit, or JDK, ourselves, but a copy of the latest OpenJDK comes bundled with Android Studio. And this is the Java Development Kit that Google recommends we use for any Android projects. So we'll use that JDK instead of, that's included instead of going to get our own. So let's start by going to Google and typing in Android Studio. We'll click on the first link here to download. And if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you can see the system requirements for each operating system. So let's see. Right here. So you can see the system requirements for Windows, Mac, Linux, and Chrome OS. Please make sure you have a computer that is capable of running this software before continuing with the course. Also check that your computer is either capable of running the emulator, or you have a physical Android device that you can test your apps on. But warning here, not all physical Android devices work. I have some older Android track phones that Android Studio doesn't recognize. Now, if you meet the system requirements, let's scroll back up to the top of the page and click Download Android Studio. All right, I'll agree to the terms and conditions, and I will download Android Studio here. And so this downloader will go through. I'm going to pause the video here, and why don't you pause it as well, and we'll see you when the installer is installed. Okay, welcome back. My installer has finished, so I'm just going to come over here to my downloads, and here we are. We'll run the installer. Okay, it's just doing its setup. We're going to allow Android Studio to make changes to our device here. Okay, and we'll click Next to continue. We'll install both the Android Studio and the Android Virtual Device. We'll have both of those checked for installation. Next, we'll specify the where we want the installation to occur, and I'll just use the default location. That's fine for me. I'll keep shortcut information here all the same, so we're not going to make any changes here, and we'll click Install. And so now the installation begins. And I don't think it actually takes that long. I'm not going to pause the video here. It looks like it's moving pretty quickly. And then once it's finished, we'll open up and start Android Studio. So perfect. Hopefully no hiccups so far along the way in the installation process for you. There's something very satisfying in watching a status bar get filled, at least on my end. Maybe you feel that same way. We'll see. Okay, we're nearing the end here, and it is completed, so we'll click Next, and I will click Finish to open up Android Studio. Okay, so while I'm presented here, this is the first time I've loaded it up, so I'm asked if I want to configure an installation folder or not import settings. So I'm not going to import settings since this is our first time starting it here. And when we open this up, we should be greeted with our setup wizard. Okay, it's doing some downloads in the back, and here is our Android setup wizard. Okay, so let's see. This is going to help us kind of get everything going. So we'll click next here. We have to choose the type of setup we want. I'm going to use standard. We're not going to do a custom installation. So we'll do standard. We'll pick our theme, whether we want light or Darkula. I'm going to pick Darkula. I like it. I think it's better on my eyes. And plus, it's a way cooler name, right? Darkula. We'll click next. And now, let's see. Let's note here, if we look, we're getting an SDK location and a JDK. Remember, we said we needed a Java development kit. It's going to install one for us right here. An SDK is a software development kit. This is essentially like the versions of Android that we want to run on like our phones, our virtual emulators. So it's going to install both of those things for us, and we can note their location here. And we can kind of see some of the other things that it's going to install, like the Android emulator, and some Android like SDK software development kit tools, etc. Okay, so we can click finish, and when we do, Android starts to download and install here. The wizard's going to take care of it for us. All right, aren't the wizards the best? So this one actually will take a little while, so I'm going to pause the video, and I will unpause it when my installation is complete. Okay, and welcome back. Hopefully now, if we look, you're presented with a similar screen that I am that says everything has been complete, downloaded complete, and we are ready to click finish. So I'll click finish here. And now if we look, what we see is the Android screen here, just like me. This is our starting screen, essentially. We see a few options that we have to create new projects over here. And then later on, what we'll see is there's going to be a window over here that's going to show our recently opened projects later on once we start getting them. The first thing that we should do is let's click configure, and let's just go down here and check for updates. Let's make sure that we're all set. And it looks like there is a beta version of 4.2. I'm going to ignore the beta version for right now. We'll just keep it in this stable version of 4.1.2. Next, let's go to configure, and let's click settings, and here we can change some of our default settings. So if we look, we can change like our appearance, if we want to change our theme or our font. We can go down to settings, and let's go down to system settings right here, and we can change the memory settings. So here we can essentially adjust the amount of RAM that Android Studio is going to use. So if your Android Studio is not running, well on your machine, you can try to allocate more or less memory that you have here. But it does tell you, allocating too little memory or allocating too much memory might degrade the performance. So there's going to be a sweet spot right there. So I just wanted to show you that in case you're not happy with the performance of the Android Studio on your computer. And lastly, and most importantly, we're going to do something to add auto imports to Android Studio so that Android Studio will automatically import any libraries we may be using when we try to code. So to do this, we're going to go into Editor, and then we're going to go into General and Auto Imports. And so here we have a couple languages, Java, Kotlin, C, and C++. We're using Kotlin, so we're going to click Add Unambiguous Imports on the Fly and Optimize Imports on the Fly for Kotlin. And while we're here, I'm going to click it for Java too. That way, in case you decide you want to try some, Android apps, running them in Java, it will happen there for you as well. So now we'll click Apply, and we'll click OK. And we're all set. So everything else we're just going to leave alone, but just know that Android Studio is pretty customizable. I think this is a great place to stop here. Android Studio is installed, working, updated, and customized, and we should be set to dive right in during our next video. So I'll see you then. Hello and welcome back. In our last video, we installed Android Studio, got it up and running, and did some configurations. I did make one more configuration here, and I'm just going to show you really quick. So if I go to Configure and Settings, under Appearance and Behavior, I have adjusted to use a custom font with a size 14. So I upped the size of the interface of the layout. So hopefully we can see it a little bit better just in these videos. Maybe you're watching it on like a tablet or a phone. So I wanted to make it a little bit larger. And if you scroll down to editor, in editor under font, I have upped the font size in the editor so the code appears larger. So if you want to change those font sizes as well, you can do that. So I've done that for you here. Now, in this video, we're going to dive into our first foray into the world of Android application development. This is pretty exciting, right? I'm pretty excited. Like all first experiences in any computer-related field, we're going to start off with a very simple Hello World application to get a feel for the Android Studio IDE, which, believe it or not, is already done for us as soon as we create a new project. So let's begin by opening up Android Studio here. You can see I'm currently running version 4.1.2 as of recording this video. In the future, you may be running a newer version. And with the newer version, there may be some changes to the UI, like so where I'm telling you to click or maybe the things that I'm referencing. But I assure you that the main content and knowledge of this course should carry as newer versions of Android Studio are going to be released. Okay, so let's create our project by selecting Create New Project. And when we do this, we're first presented with a variety of options. First, we can see that we can select our deployment target, so phones and tablets, wearable OS, Android TV, etc. So we're going to target solely on phones and tablets in this course. Next, we're presented with the option to choose a starting activity. An activity is a single focused thing that a user can do. So for example, you might have an activity that controls a preferences screen, or one that launches the camera roll, or one that is in charge of creating a database to store information. Every single app must have at least one activity as its entry point, or where the app will go when the user clicks the launch icon on their phone. Without that activity, there'd be no code to run, so we have to have at least one activity. Activities then have associated layout files with them. So the layout defines how the user is going to interact with the app, or what the UI is going to look like. You can think of it like this. A single activity is a piece of functionality of the app, and the layout is how your user will then interact with that functionality. So you can see a lot of starting activities here. We have like an activity that's got some bottom navigation. We've got a login activity, a scrolling activity, something called fragment and view model. So lots of different choices, but for our course, we're always going to start with an empty activity because we don't want to just create apps, but rather we want to learn how to create apps. So I think we're going to get our best understanding by choosing this empty activity here. This way you leave the course with kind of what I hope is a firm understanding of all the Android concepts and principles that we encounter along the way. So I'm going to choose an empty activity. We'll click Next. And now what I have to do is I have to give our app a name. So I'm going to just call this Hello World. So if I just write Hello World here, it says the application name for most apps begins with an uppercase letter. So we should really try to follow that convention, right? So I'll say Hello World. The package name for our course, we can always leave alone. So we're going to keep that the same. And then I am going to set my save location here. So I have a default directory, My Udemy Course Android, where I'm saving all of my projects. I would suggest you do the same. And if you don't have your project name at the end of this directory, you should add it so it creates its own directory within this directory, right? So this whole project will be stored in the Hello World directory, which is stored in the My Udemy Course Android. Now we see our language options, Java or Kotlin. We want Kotlin. And lastly, we have to select our minimum SDK, or minimum software development kit version. Essentially, which version of the Android software we want to target. So you typically want to target as many users as possible, right? So you may think, okay, let's target, if I click like Android 4.1 here, if I scroll down, it tells me that this is going to run on 99.8 of all devices. So that might be really great, right? This, however, has its disadvantages though, because if we choose to target this as our minimum SDK or minimum Android version, then we might miss out on having access to some features that became available in like Android 6.0 or Android 8.0. So if you look, right, if we select Android 8.0, now maybe we get some new features that we can use in our apps, but now our app's only going to run on 60.8% of devices if we choose to use those new features, because devices that are running like Android 4 or Android 5, they don't have access to those features. So really, this is like a trade-off. We have to sort of leverage the services and the features that we need to use with reaching the most target audience. So this is just a really simple Hello World app. I don't need anything special. So I don't know, I'll select Android API 19, which is Android 4.4. And I don't know, I'm just picking this arbitrarily, okay? So we're going to, now with everything set here, we'll select Finish, and we should begin to build our app. Okay, so now as the app is building, you may be prompted to update some files or install some extensions. Maybe you have like a Kotlin extension that you have to install. Go ahead and do that while the project builds. Really make sure everything is up to date. It's very important. So it looks like, okay, this thing called Gradle is doing something. It's building. We'll learn more about what that is momentarily. But it does sort of look like, okay, we've got like this project here. It's here, and we've got two files. So what are these two files? Well, this looks like it says main activity.kt. So this looks like it is our activity file, which is kind of cool because we said every app needs at least one activity. It is the entry point for our applications. So when the user clicks on our launch icon for Hello World, it's this code that is going to run. And then we also have something called an activity main.xml, which is currently loading. This XML is our layout file, essentially. And so this is the layout that is going to appear when the main activity code is run, right? Because this is just going to run some code. This isn't going to tell us what our app should look like. It's this layout file right here that's going to tell us what our app should look like. And here we have it. So and you can see right here, it says Hello World. Quite nicely, it already says it, right? So perfect. And then note over here we have this project pane that I can click to open this up. If these files didn't open up for you, you can find them by clicking this project tab, opening up the app directory. Inside the Java folder and our first subdirectory, you have your main activity file. And inside the res folder or resources folder under layout, you have your layout file. So here are our two files here. This is great. I think this is a great place to stop. We've created our first project. In the next video, this continuation of the setup, what we'll do is we'll look at where are we going to test these apps, where are we going to deploy these apps. And so we have two options. We can deploy them to a virtual device or a physical device, and we'll look at how to do that in the upcoming videos. I'll see you then. Since we're making Android apps, it would be really nice to have an Android device to test our applications on. So you may have a physical one in front of you, and in an upcoming video I'll show you how you can hopefully use your physical device to run your apps. But if you don't have a physical device, don't worry. We can actually create virtual Android devices here in Android Studio. Android Studio comes with the Android Virtual Device, or AVD Manager, which we can use to create Android emulators that we can then run on a computer. Each emulator we create can simulate a particular type of Android device, like various phones or tablets, and they can run different versions of the Android software development kit. So like we could run Android 11 or Android 8 or Android 4.4 if we wanted to. Once we build these, we can run our apps on these emulators just like they're physical devices. Just a warning though, these emulators can take up a good amount of disk space and can kind of be resource intensive. So depending on your computer specs, take caution before you just start creating and running multiple devices. So we can find the AVD Manager here under Tools, and Tools AVD Manager. And what you'll be presented with is a list of virtual devices that you currently have. So you see I currently have 4 different virtual devices. I have 3 phones, the Pixel 2, 3, and 4, and then a tablet here, the Pixel C. After this video, you might want to create a couple of different virtual devices. It's always good to test your app on different devices so you can see how the layout works and maybe different versions of Android. So I think for our purposes here, I'm primarily going to use a tablet, and I'll talk about why in an upcoming video. So I'm going to try to make a Pixel C here for you folks. So we're going to go to Create New Device, and when we come here, we're first presented with which type of device we want. We're going to really only concern ourselves with phones or tablets. So you can see for our phone, here's the Pixel 4, the 3, the 2. Let's go to tablet and let's create a Pixel C. And so let's click next now. And essentially what we're going to do, that just created the device for us, but the device doesn't have any software or operating system installed on it. So we have to give the device a version of Android to run. And so you're going to have to download one of these versions of the Android operating system. So I downloaded the newest one, Android 11, which is R. You probably have a nice little download link here. You should click download. And that's going to take a little time. So while that's downloading, I suggest you pause the video. Okay, so hopefully you're back now. You've got the OS installed, or downloaded. And so now let's install it to our device. We'll click Next here. we need to give our device a name, and I'm just going to keep the default name Pixel C API 30, and we're going to set the startup orientation here. I'm going to have it start up in portrait mode because that's how I like to use my tablets. And then we'll click Finished. I'm not going to click Finish because I already have this device made. You can click Finish, and then it should add the Pixel C to your list of virtual devices. So great, now that we have that, let's scroll over here to this Actions tab, and let's look at some of the things we can do. We can launch the emulator, we can edit the emulator, and if we click here, we have a bunch of options. We can duplicate, wipe data, cold boot, etc. So these two right here, wipe data and cold boot, I really want to talk about. Sometimes the virtual emulators work really nice, and other times they behave a little erratically, in my opinion. What do I mean by that? Like, you might start up your emulator, and you'll notice on the home screen some of your app icons are missing, or some of the text under the icon, like the icon label, doesn't appear. Or maybe you launch a keyboard and the keyboard pops up but none of the letters are appearing. That weird behavior can sort of be fixed by doing one of these two things. Wipe data will essentially wipe all user data from the emulator, so anything that you've installed on the emulator will be gone, and I think it sort of does like a factory reset, and then you can just re-upload the app you're working on and test it, and that seems to work. For fixing issues. Cold boot, what this does is when we launch our app, it loads from a save state. So whatever you were currently doing in your emulator before you last closed it down, it will load from that state, which is kind of nice, right? Because it kind of picks up where we left off, but it does, I think, cause some of that erratic behavior. What a cold boot does is it turns the emulator on as if it was off. So it'll start it up, as if it was off. So I don't know, I'm going to do a launch this emulator right now. So I'm going to launch my emulator. You should launch your emulator. We're getting this start AVD here. I do apologize. So there, look at that. My tablet popped up nicely. When I said these emulators are a little resource intensive. When I'm running Android Studio, when I'm running an emulator, and when I'm running my screen recording software, OBS Studio, all three of them, I do notice a little bit of lag here. So with this emulator running, you might see, a little bit of lag in my video, and I apologize for that. So one of the things that I'm going to do to fix that is I'm going to use a physical device, and then we'll talk about that in our next video for the purposes of this course. Okay, so I think that's going to work a little bit better here. So now you see the tablet has booted up. If we talk about over here, we have a nice little sidebar we can close the emulator here with the X. We can power it down. We have volume rockers up and down. We have orientation, so you can change the orientation of the device. And when we change the orientation of the device, you're going to see there's a little icon over here. We also then have to click that little icon to change the orientation of the application that we're looking at. We can take pictures with the camera. It's not like a real camera. It presents you with like a virtual room or a virtual selfie, which is pretty cool. And then we kind of have like our control buttons, right? Like our back button, our home button, and then what's this one called? Our overview button, which will open up like all of the launched apps. So as your device is booting up for this first time, it might be a little slow. It might be doing some like updates or getting some files in line on the back end. So we'll let it take its time here. Okay, so it's going. Hopefully this won't take too much longer. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So the Pixel is starting. And what we should see is we'll be presented with a really nice, virtual device here. Again, I might be getting a little lag right now in this video because my computer's just doing too much. You shouldn't get the lag if you're not running screen recording software. You should be fine. I don't get this lag when I'm not running my screen recording software. So here's my tablet, right? I can swipe up and I should be able to see a list of apps. So here they are. I don't know. Let's open like the clock. So I can open the clock. The clock should open up. Here it comes. So that's kind of nice. I can do an orientation. So I'm going to rotate the orientation, and you'll see there's going to be a little icon I have to click to change the orientation of the app. So there's the screen orientation, and then there's the icon right here. I'm going to click that, and by clicking this, it should change the orientation of the app. And there we go. Okay, so now that orientation is changed. So what do I mean by this like cold boot, right? So right now you can see we've changed the default orientation of the tablet, and we have an app up. So I'm going to close this out. And so when I close this out, it says saving state here. Okay, so when I launch this emulator again, it's going to try to load from that save state. So let's see, I'm going to launch this, and hopefully it should launch a little bit quicker now, right? Because the stuff has already been done. we've already kind of perfect. So right here, right, you see the tablet is oriented horizontally or in landscape mode, and the clock is open. So that's how that works. However, if I do a cold boot, and you can see, look, a little bit of strange behavior, like the clock already just like disappeared. I don't know why that just happened. If I do a cold boot, so let's just check down here. If I do a cold boot, so let me close this out. All right, so it's saving its state. And so now if we do a cold boot of the tablet, what's going to happen? Well, it shouldn't load from that save state. It should just do its default thing. And that's exactly what happened, it looks like. Perfect. So the orientation is back to normal. It says cold boot requested by the user. And we're going to be turning this on, for the first time. All right, so that works pretty nicely here. So I'm actually going to close out of this right here. So we're going to close out. All right, it's saving its state. That's fine. I'm going to close out. Yeah, I killed that process. That's okay. And I'm going to close out of the ABD manager here. So now we've got a device made. And again, you can go back and create some more virtual devices. You can see if I look here, right here is my deploy list for my targets. I've got my 4 right here. So how do we run our app on this virtual device? Well, we have to click the right device that we want to test it on. So if I want to load it on the Pixel 2 or 3 or 4 or my Pixel C, which is my tablet, I'll click my Pixel C. And then I just simply click this little green button. So if I click that green button, we should see our layout, which is right here. It says Hello World. It should load up onto our tablet. So let's check this out. All right, so I'm going to load it up. We're launching the device. It might take a little bit of time, but hopefully not too much here. It's the Gradle build is running, and we'll talk more about what the Gradle is in the future, but we want to just make sure like this, everybody is at the same, place in the beginning. We've got the software installed. We've got working devices that we can test on. So if you don't have an Android device, don't worry. You can use one of these physical devices, and it should work, pretty good for you, depending on what type of emulator you want to run. If you have a physical device, it also should work pretty well. I will say this though, with the physical devices, I have a couple of, older like Android like track phones, which are like a cell phone carrier here in the United States, and I think I got them from like Best Buy for like $25. A couple of them work nicely with Android Studio, and a couple of them are not recognized. So sometimes the devices will work, and sometimes they won't. So all right, it says waiting for all target devices to come online. Let's see, my device is hopefully going to come online soon, and then I think it's going to install my app nicely here for us. And again, I do really like these virtual devices, but for the purpose of our course, I think I'm going to use a physical device just because the screen recording, it allows me to get better results with the screen recording. All right, so the Pixel is starting, and if you remember, we had cold booted last time, so this had to go through all of those, this startup again to install the app, which it says it is installing right now. And let's see. In the future, right, moving forward, this process hopefully shouldn't take as long. So if you're sitting there going, oh my God, what do I have in store for me with this course? We're going to spend a minute just launching our apps. That's not going to be the case every time. So there we have it. There is our app, Hello World, and it says Hello World right there, which is kind of cool, right? We're running it on the device. If I click home and we back out of this and I swipe up, we can see the Hello World app right there, and we can launch it. Okay, so there we have it, our virtual emulated device. I think this is a great place to stop. We should all have a device up and running, and if you want to, you can go create a few more. In the next video, we'll talk about physical devices. I'll see you then. Hello, and welcome back. In our last video, we saw how to make our own virtual Android device here using the AVD manager. So I think we created a Pixel C tablet right together, and maybe you've created a few other devices on your own. I did say for the purpose of our course, I'm going to be using a physical device, and so in this video, I'm going to show you how to get those set up. And the reason why is because when I'm running Android Studio and my emulators and my screen recording software, I do get some lag. And you probably noticed that at the end of the last video. I was talking about the app popping up and the video kind of froze. But I promise you, that will not happen, hopefully, for the rest of this course. And so how am I going to do a physical device? I'm going to share a physical device with you. Well, what I have here, I have Samsung Side Sync set up, and so this is just a nice little software where I can screen share my tablet screen that's in front of me with my computer. And so I have a Galaxy Tab 2 here. I think it's Tab S2 or Samsung Galaxy Tab. And so if I click Tablet Screen, you should be able to see exactly what is on my screen. So there it is, right? So this is my Android device that is in front of me. All right. And so now the question is, how do we get this to work with this? And what we have to do first is we have to do a little bit of setup. And so essentially what we have to do is we have to enable the developer options on our Android device. And the way you do this is probably a little bit different depending on what device you're working with, but for the most part, it's all the same. You're going to go to your settings, and you're going to come over here on settings, and you're going to search for something. Essentially, you're looking for build number. All right, you're looking for build number. So normally it's in like the about section on your settings. So mine says about tablet, but if you don't have a tablet, it might say like about phone, or something along those lines. And so in my about tablet, I have my build number right here. So find build number, and then you need to tap build number 7 times. So right, if I start tapping it, it already says developer mode has already been turned on. Mine's already turned on. But if you tap this 7 times, eventually it'll give you a warning on the 6th time, like, are you sure you want to do this? And on the 7th time, it'll say developer mode has been enabled. And so when developer mode is enabled, then under your settings, what you should see is something similar to what I have here, a developer options tab that opened up. So you want to find that developer options, and you may have to search around a bit. Again, it's different for each device, so depending on the device you're using, you might want to like YouTube it. But again, find build number, tap build number 7 times, and then come in here to developer options. And what we're looking for is USB debugging. All right, we have to turn USB debugging on in order for Android Studio to be able to communicate with our tablet. So mine is set. All right, so that's on. All right, perfect. So I'm gonna back out here. I'm gonna go home, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna connect my tablet to my computer via a USB cable. So I promise you, I'm plugging in a physical device right now in front of me. I'm gonna plug it into my USB port. All right, there it is. And so don't worry about this error. This message. This is from my side sync. I want to cancel that. And you can see right here, slow charging. Yeah, that's okay. And this is important. It says allow USB debugging. And so we got to say, yep, we want to allow the computer to speak to the tablet. And so I'm going to click OK here. All right, so we'll click OK. And now what we should hopefully see happen is we should see this device, this tablet, appear here in our deployment targets. And look at that, it popped right up. So Samsung SM7 or T710, there's my physical device. So on top of all of the emulated devices I now have my physical device. If your physical device, right, if you did this, if you enabled developer mode, you did USB debugging, and you hooked it up, and it's not popping up, one of the things you can do is come down here to troubleshoot device connections, and you can rescan your devices. That may help. But like I did say, I have had some physical Android devices that just were not recognized here in Android Studio, so it is maybe a little hit or miss. I'm going to be using this tablet for the rest of the course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually upload my app to this, and let's see how this runs. So I'm going to click upload. We're going to select, right, we got the right deployment target selected. It says that the build is running, devices are coming online, install, and hopefully it will install quite nicely. And there we have it. Okay, so it opens up, it says hello world right here for me. If I back out and I go to the home screen, if I swipe up, I should now have a nice icon for this. So let's see, I'm going to swipe up. Oh, I don't have, I gotta hit apps. I don't know how my tablet works. And there it is, right? Hello world. So there's the nice icon. So perfect. And hopefully with this video, right, and the way that I've got this configured using my physical device, streaming here via Samsung Side Sync, a lot less lag. And so hopefully by now you are set up. You have Android Studio installed. You either have a virtual device running or you have your physical device up and running. We can dive into talking about what's going on in this project, and then we can start building our own projects. So I look forward to seeing you in those upcoming videos. Hello and welcome back. You should now have Android Studio up and running, configured, and you should have a list of virtual devices or physical devices that you can deploy your target apps on. Right, so here's my physical device right here, my Android tablet. Before we do anything else with our application, I'd like to explore the Android Studio interface and get familiar with some of the features and files that are created for us when we start an Android Studio project. So you notice here we opened up our Hello World app and we were presented with these two files right here. We have mainactivity.kt and activitymain.xml. So these are two very important files. If they don't open up, you can find them over here in this project tab. So you can click your projects tab to get a file hierarchy. The main activity tab is here under Java, this first subfolder, and our layout file activitymain.xml is under the res or resources folder right here in the layout directory. Now, if you recall, we stated that every app needs an activity, which is a single focus thing that the users can do. We also said that every activity has an associated layout file that controls how the user essentially interacts with the activity. And here are the two files, right? That's pretty cool. They open right up for us. Android Studio makes this for us. The main activity is the first screen that's going to appear when the user launches the app. Right? They hit their launcher icon. So right here's my here is my icon for Hello World. As soon as I click this app icon, it's this activity that's loaded up. Now this activity is essentially code, right? And so this code then does some work, and we'll see how to then bring in a layout file. And here is my associated layout file then. So, and that's the layout file that we see when running this. So this kind of works nicely. So somehow the main activity and the layout file are associated. So you may notice here that the names are very similar. And this naming convention is pretty standard when associating activities to their layouts. The activity is going to be uppercase, so main activity, and then the layout file, the words are switched and it's going to be lowercase, so activity_main. So for example, if my layout was called second activity, then my layout file would be activity second. And that's sort of the convention that we're going to use. It's pretty standard. So before we dive into really looking at how these files work, let's go look at where these files live in this project tab. So I'm going to actually bring this project tab over here. And again, so we can click here, we can expand this project tab, and this is like the file hierarchy of our application. So if I minimize this here, we have this app folder, and inside of the app folder we have a couple of subfolders, a manifest, a Java, and a res. You may not have this Java generated or res generated. If you don't worry. These are sort of built for us when we run our apps, and we're not going to really concern ourselves too much with them. So let's start with the manifest folder. So inside of this manifest folder we have this file Android manifest. Let's open it up and take a look. Here we can see things like our package name. So here's our package name, Hello World. We see references to like our app icon. So we have our icon and our round icon. We see the label, which is the name of our app. We see a theme that we're using. And it looks like we have a reference here to our main activity. This manifest file is essentially going to contain essential information about our app to the Android device. So this is like a lot of information we need in order to run, right? It says, okay, we're going to use this IC launcher as our icon. So that exists somewhere, and it sort of determines what this launcher icon looks like. Perfect. And we got this string like Hello World. That's maybe the name of that app right there. So Hello World. So this is also where we could define any permissions that our app might use to like access like the camera or contacts. We could express them here. So essentially the manifest is a file that we're going to put important information about the app. So that's our manifest. Next, let's go to the Java folder. So our Java folder right here, it looks like we've got 3 subfolders. Even though the folder says Java, remember we're using Kotlin, so rest assured we already going to use Kotlin. Remember Kotlin was sort of designed to work alongside Java, so it's just the fact that this says Java here, we don't have to worry about too much. So these 3 subfolders, we're going to concern ourselves with the first subfolder. This is where all of our Kotlin code is going to live, and this is where our main activity lives. The next 2 subfolders are for testing, and they contain tests, and that's really beyond the scope of our class here, so we're not going to worry about these 2 subfolders. Our third subfolder of importance is the res folder, and this contains all of our resources for our Android app. So if I open this up, you can see that resources include things like drawable images, layout files, strings, colors, etc. And Android does a really nice job of sort of organizing these for us. And so let's talk a little bit about each subfolder. The drawables subfolder right here will contain images that our app will use. And primarily, we're going to work with something known as vector assets. And we'll talk about what vector assets are in an upcoming video. The mipmap folder also holds drawings, but these drawings are what we would use for our icons. So look here, you can see the IC launcher and the IC launcher round, which are what were referenced in our manifest, right? Icon and round icon right here. So if I open up IC launcher, let's open up this file, you can see there's our app icon right there. So we somehow are telling, OS and the OS in our manifest that, hey, we want to use this sort of icon right here, this IC launcher. So this is where we're going to put all of our icons. So the drawables are going to be our vector assets that are going to be in the app, and the mipmap folder is where we're going to put our icons. Next, we have our layout folder, which holds our layout. So there's our activity main.xml file, and we'll talk more about this layout file in the future. And then lastly, let's look at our values. Our values hold essentially values, right? So things like colors. So here are a bunch of color resources, and we're going to create some color resources for us. These are the colors that our current app is using. We have string resources, and we'll create string resources as well. Okay, good. So a nice little overview of the file hierarchy here. Some of the important folders, we have our manifest, where we're going to store important information about our app. We have our Java folder that's going to hold our Kotlin code, and then we have our resources folder, which holds things like our layout file. If I minimize all of the app directory, you see I have another thing right here. It's called Gradle scripts. So I'm actually going to close this stuff out here. And let's just look at what this Gradle scripts folder is. The Gradle is extremely important to Android app development. This is taken from Google's page. Gradle is a build automation system that uses domain-specific language to describe an app's project structure, configuration, and dependencies. Whew. So what does that actually mean? Well, it's the Gradle is what's going to build our apps for us, right? So like right now, our app, we have a Kotlin file right here, and we have a layout file right here. When we want to deploy them to our target, it's the Gradle that's going to build and compile them and put them together. All right, so it's going to figure out what does this app need to run. It's going to compile it, and it's going to put it onto our phones or devices. And in particular, it's going to take care of the dependencies for us. And so one of the things I like to think of it this way. When we start an Android Studio project, we sort of get the bare bones. And that's really a good thing. We don't want every piece of functionality for our app because it would maybe be a little bit too resource intensive. So instead, we start with very little, and we only bring in what we need. And so the Gradle file is a place where you can add library dependencies to your project to bring in the functionality that you need. So not only does it build our apps for us, but it also sort of takes care of dependencies. So it's really great. And so if we look here, there's lots of files, but we're only going to be primarily concerned with the first two files, the project level file and the app level file or module level. The project level file, if we open this up, it contains configurations that are common to all modules in the project. And so we're really only going to be working with one module, and so we really don't have to make many changes to this. But it's nice to look at. You can see our current version of Kotlin that we're running. We have a few dependencies in here, and then look, it says, no, do not place your application dependencies here. They belong in the individual module Gradle build file. So it's telling us, don't put stuff in this file, which is good. We should be putting them in the module file. So let's go look at this module file. We can see some things. We've got some plugins up here at the top defined. We have a default configuration. You can see here's our minimum SDK version that we're targeting, and then the current version, I think right here, that we're working on. And if I scroll down a little bit more, you can see I have a lot of dependencies listed here. So this is some native functionality that's going to be included in our app. If I want to add some functionality with the Gradle, it's pretty nice. All I have to do is just come here and add some lines in. And so I'm going to actually, if I go to this website, and I'll link to this website in the video below. Here is the Android developers website. These are all of the Jetpack libraries that we can work with. So things like, I don't know, card view. We could work with card view. We could work with something like, I don't know, grid layout or life cycle or recycler view. Where's recycler view? Recycler view right here. So if I want to bring in this functionality, like I'll click life cycle. Okay, we can see it right here. I have Kotlin and Java. I can just click which one I want. And so maybe I want to bring in view model and live data functionality into my app. And you don't know what those are. That's okay. You don't need to know it yet. I copy this. I come over to my Gradle file and I just paste it right in here in the dependencies. And that's all I have to do. If you notice here, it says Gradle files have been changed since the last project sync. A project sync may be necessary. Anytime you make a change to your Gradle file, you have to sync those changes. So you should click sync now. I'm going to ignore the changes though because I don't actually need this functionality for our little Hello World app. I just wanted to show that off. So the Gradle system can be a lot and it takes time to get comfortable with it, but don't worry. We'll learn more about some of these dependencies and why we would want to use them as the course progresses. To begin, we're going to focus on simple apps that don't need any extra dependencies. And so we're just going to say, hey, it's this Gradle that is going to build and compile our apps for us. So now we've explored the file structure in Android Studio. We've looked at the manifest, our main activity, and our layout file, as well as the Gradle file. In our future videos, what we're going to do is talk about each one of these files a little bit more in depth and see how they affect our app. So I look forward to seeing you in that video. Hello and welcome back. In our last video, we took a look at the project tab here, and we really got a good understanding of the file hierarchy for an Android Studio project. So, right, we said, okay, we've got this manifest folder where important information lives. We have this Java folder here where our Kotlin code will live. And we have this resource folder here where resources, and in particular our layout file, will live. So these three files are very important, and it's these three files that are created automatically for us anytime we start a project. And so what I want to do now in the next few videos is dive into these files a little bit more. And so we're going to start with the Android manifest. So if you look, the Android manifest, we said, holds important information about our app, right? So we have things like the package name, our icons, the labels, the theme that we're going to use, and a reference to our main activity. So if I come over here, if we look here, okay, here is our app icon, and then here's the app label. It says Hello World, and it's sort of smushed together, right? It's one word. I don't like it. I would much rather have it look something like this, right? Cube Escape Paradox, where it's spaced out. So we can change that using the manifest. All we have to do is just change this label. But if you notice here, this doesn't say Hello World, but instead it says @string/app name, because we're using something known as a string resource. And that's what this @ symbol says. This @ symbol means, okay, this is a resource, and we want to get the value stored in this resource. Well, we have a whole folder dedicated to resources of our apps. And if we come over here to values, you can see we have a strings.xml file. And this is going to hold all of our string resources. And so we're going to try to use string resources everywhere in our apps rather than hard coding strings. And the reason why, string resources, they have a descriptive name, so like app name, I know what this string is using. And then once I create this string resource, I can reference this in multiple spots in my app. And then if I want to make a change, maybe I don't want this to say Hello World, but maybe I want it to say Hello Space World. Well, now by making the change once here, the change will occur in all other instances of the string resource where it's being used. So that's pretty nice, right? So there's my string resource. We made our change. All right, so that should work on our label. And let's just test this. I'm going to upload it to my device. Okay. The Gradle build is running. So remember we said it's the Gradle that's going to be building our apps for us. So that's going to build it, and then we should see it install, and it should make that change nicely for us. Okay. And here it is. Let's see. It's launching the activity. If you notice, my label up at the top now says Hello Space World. It didn't do that before. If I come home and I look at my app, we have changed the label. Nice. So we used the manifest here, and we introduced the ideas of string resources, something that we'll use quite a bit. Let's also say I don't like this icon, right? It's pretty default looking icon. I want to make my own icon. So we can do this using the manifest. We said, okay, in the manifest, we're referencing the launcher icon and the round icon. We just have to change those. Well, if we want to make a new icon, we have to create a new image. And luckily for us, Google provides many great clip art style images that are going to work really well. And so we want to create a new icon. And so our images are either going to go in this drawable folder or this bitmap folder. And if you remember, we said icons should go in here. So I'm going to right click my bitmap folder, and I'm going to come here to new, and we're going to make an image asset for our icon. Now I'm gonna let's see. I'm gonna name my icon. So I'll name it. I don't know. We'll just name it my icon. Sure. And now I have a couple of options here, foreground, background layer. We're going to set the foreground. We could use an actual image, or we can use some of the clip art provided by Google. And so we're going to do that. And I'm going to click this image here, and we're going to look at all of the different options we have for our icon or any like image asset that we want to use. And so there's a lot, right? There's a lot in here. There's a lot to sort of fish through. But one of the things that's sort of nice, once these load in, we can actually kind of sort through them by category, which is really great. So let's see. I'm going to select a new image, and we'll see. Let's do, what do I want to do? Let's do social. Maybe let's do social. Hey, look at that. And we can get emoji people. I like this one. It looks like someone is waving. So we're going to grab this icon. You could also just search, for it here if you know what you're looking for. You could type in emoji people, and we could search for it right there. So we'll grab this. We can also change the color of this resource. So I'll change the color, and I'm going to set it to a color here. When we define colors, right, in case you're not sure, we can define them as RGB tuple values on a scale of 0 to 255. So if I put 255 in red, it's all red. If I do 255 with red and green, it makes yellow with 0 in the blue. And of course, if I do 255 for all of them, it's going to give me a nice white color. And if you notice here, we also can specify our color in hexadecimal, where 2 digits represent, a color channel. So the first 2 is red, the second 2 is green, and the next 2 are blue. So in hexadecimal, 255 is FF. That means a full channel. So I'm going to mess with this. I'm going to set my color to be EC34B8. All right, so it's like this like hot pink color. And you can kind of see here are the RGB values for that. And so we'll click choose. All right, so that looks nice, but I really don't like how it looks on the green background. So let's adjust the background layer here. We're going to use a color for the background layer, and I'm going to set the color here to the background layer to, let's set it to black. All right, so or I'll just set it to black. So I'll do 0, 0, and 0. All right, so there we have it. So I'll choose that, and I think that looks pretty cool. Awesome, so that looks pretty nice, and I'm going to click next now, and I will select finish. And when I do this, we have just created a new icon. You can see the icons here in the bitmap folder, my icon and my icon round. So what I now have to do is reference them in my manifest. So instead of here in my label, or I'm sorry, here in my icon, I have @bitmap IC launcher. So we're going to reference not IC launcher, but we're going to reference my icon. And you can see it sort of pops up here for auto finish or auto complete. And we'll do the same thing with the round icon. So I'll say my icon round. And so now if I run this, let's upload this again to my device, I should see the icon changing. I should have like this cool, like, I don't know, 80s vibe icon with this like neon pink and black icon. So let's let that do its thing. All right, so the Gradle is running. The Gradle is going to be building this. It should install our app, and then we'll be good to go. And so, you're really starting to see how we can sort of customize some of our application here using the manifest. All right. Hopefully this is going to finish soon. We'll see. While this is loading, one of the next things we'll talk about is this theme here. We're going to talk about what is the theme of our app and how we might be able to change that. Oh, and hey, look at that. You saw the icon change. So that's kind of cool, right? If we come up to our app icon, there we now have our own default app icon. It says hello world with this nice wave. And so when I click this, we saw we changed the string here, right? So it's no longer that, all smushed together. We changed the label, but I don't maybe like this color, this purple color here. And so one of the things that we can do is we can change the theme that our app is using. So right now we're referencing a theme in at style/theme hello world. So if we come over to our resources folder under values, you see we have a themes folder. And so I'm going to open up my themes folder, and in here I have the theme.hello world. So this is the theme that we're sort of following. And so you can see I have a color primary, and it's purple 500, and that's exactly what that color looks like. And so You notice that we aren't typing out the hex values right in here, but instead we are storing the color in a color resource. So at color purple 500. So let's go over to our color resources. So they're in this res folder, right? And here is purple 500. And so we have that. We can actually define our own colors. So why don't we define our own colors here? So I'm going to define a color, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm just going to mimic what's there. Color name equals my theme. We'll just call it my theme for right now. And now I'm going to specify the hex value. So I'm going to use that hot pink that we came up with. So I'm going to do EC34B8. All right, and so there it is. Now, if you notice here, these hex values also have an FF at the start of them. You can put another two hex digits here, and that's going to be the alpha channel or the transparency. When you leave them off, it defaults as FF or 1. But if I change this, like if I don't know, if I write like we'll do 90, we can change the transparency of the color. And so you can see how it's a little bit more transparent. And if I make it 00, it's going to be fully transparent and you don't see it at all. So I'm going to just leave it off here for now. We don't need any of the transparency. But now that I've created this color resource here, I can reference it in my theme. So I'm going to go back to my theme file. And where I'm saying my primary color should be this purple 500, let's change this out and let's make it the my theme color. So there it's going to be that hot pink. And so now that theme should change because we're referencing the theme here in the manifest. And so we'll upload this and we'll check it and make sure that it is working exactly the way that we want it to. Okay, so the Gradle build's running. Perfect. It's going to do its installation. We've made some really nice changes here. We've changed the label of our icon. We've changed the label of our app. We've changed the icon of our app, and now we're also changing the theme of our app. So let's see. It's going to launch the activity. We should see that nice pink color, and we do right there. So I think this is a really good place to stop. A nice sort of overview of what we can do with the manifest, kind of change some of the important information about the app. In our next video, what we'll do is we'll take a look at what are some of these other files, like the main activity and our layout file. So I'll see you then. Hello and welcome back. In our last video, we took a deeper dive into the Android manifest, and we saw how we could change some of the important information about our app, such as the app's, let's see, we're going to connect here via site sync. There we go. Such as the app's label, the app's icon, and then the theme that the app uses, like the changing of the color here. Now, let's move on to looking at our main activity file. So here is our main activity living in this Java folder. I'm going to open this up. Lots of programming languages have a main method that sort of starts or opens up the program. Android apps have a main activity that is designated as the activity to be launched when the user taps on the app icon. Android uses information that's found in the manifest file to find this main activity, and then it does some setup so the activity can be launched. And this gives the app essentially some functionality. But at this point, all the app is functionality. It's just code. There's nothing to actually look at because there's no layout to the functionality that's been, set up yet. So the activity itself has to do some setup so that the layout can then be inflated, which gives the user something to look at or interact with. And so I'm using that word very carefully here, inflated, because we call this process layout inflation. So let's look at the main activity.kt file and we'll have a closer look. So here is our main activity. One of the first things we'll see is we have the class definition, main activity, and the notation main activity : app compat activity means that the main activity class, this main activity class, extends from the app compat activity class. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that our main activity class has access to everything that the app compat activity class has. An app compat activity is a subclass of the activity class, which is a broader class, and the activity class supports the app compat activity class supports all modern Android features while providing backwards compatibility with the older versions of Android. So to make our app available to the largest number of devices and the largest number of users possible, we're always going to extend our main activity from the app compat activity class. And so maybe I'm going to put a little comment here, and we'll comment this main activity out. We'll say main activity extends from app compat activity, giving it more functionality, we'll just say. Okay, perfect. Now, once we get inside of this class, let's see what happens. The first thing that we do is we call override function on create. So we call an override to the on create method. Activities, right, our main activity, they have a set of predefined methods known as lifecycle methods that are called during the setup and the life of the activity. We'll learn more about these in upcoming videos, but one such lifecycle method is onCreate, which runs when the device creates your main activity. And this is done only once at the start of your app. So I'm going to put a comment here. We'll say onCreate is a lifecycle method that runs only once at the start of the app. Okay, and so there's lots of these lifecycle methods, and what we can do is we can override the lifecycle method. So what does it mean to override? Well, when you override a method, essentially what you're doing is you're replacing or adding on to the code that's already in the method. And so you have two options, right? You can completely replace the method, so we can completely replace what onCreate should do, or we can sort of extend this method. And so we're going to choose to extend this method by calling super.onCreate. So right here, we're going to put a comment. We'll say extend onCreate rather than completely overriding it. And don't worry, if you're sitting here and saying, man, you're putting a lot of comments in this code, I'm only doing it for this video. As we move further along, we'll put less comments in. But at this point, the purpose of this is educational, so I'm trying to really comment this out. So we're going to extend onCreate rather than overriding it, which by calling super.onCreate. So that means whatever the onCreate method was going to do, it's going to continue doing. And then we're going to add our own code right here. And so what is this very important line of code that we create here? Well, the onCreate method is where you should initialize the essential parts of your app because it runs once at the start of the app. So when the app starts, there are certain things that we have to initialize, right? Maybe like our layout file. We said that, okay, the Android manifest links to this main activity file so that when I click my launch icon, okay, when I click my launcher icon, it loads up the main activity. So when I click that launcher icon, the main activity is loaded here in the manifest, and this main activity is essentially code, right? There's no layout that's going to be brought in. And so in here, we're overriding our onCreate method, which should be run when the app starts. So it's going to run as soon as we open up the app. We're extending it, so it's going to do everything that we want it to do, and then it's going to run this extra bit of code. And it's this extra bit of code right here that brings in our layout file, so I can actually see my layout file. And this process is known as layout inflation. Layout inflation is the process in which the views that are defined in our XML layout, which we haven't really looked at, but if I open up my layout file, right here is my layout file. So these views, like this text hello world, it exists inside of this layout file. It does not exist inside of this main activity. But layout inflation is the process in which the views that we define in the layout files are turned into or inflated into Kotlin objects. And so once this happens, our main activity can draw the views onto the screen, it can modify the views, and it can work with them. So we use this line right here, set content view, and to inflate our layout. And so I'm going to put a comment here because this is very important. We'll say inflate our layout with set content view and turn all views in the layout into Kotlin objects. Okay, so there we have it, right? Now let's look a little bit further here. In this set content view, we actually have to pass a reference to our layout file, right? We can't just say, set content view and leave it blank like this because there's nothing to set. You can see we sort of get an error here. So I'm going to undo that. And so let's look what's passed here, r.layout.activityMain. So this is very similar to what our layout file is called. Our layout is called activityMain.xml. And so we have this R notation, or this R class. Well, the R class is generated when we build our app and by the Gradle, and it contains all of the app's assets, including the contents of the resources directory. One of those things is the layout file, right? So R, the resources folder, .layout.activityMain is sort of giving the location of the layout file that we want to essentially inflate. And that's what's happening here. Okay, so that is a really good overview of what's happening in our main activity right when we start a new project. In our next video, we're going to dive a little bit more into this layout file that we are inflating, and I look forward to seeing you in that video. So far, we've taken a deeper dive into the Android manifest and our main activity Kotlin file. So if we look at our app, if I come back here and we look at the launcher icon, when I click the launcher icon, there's information in the manifest that says what activity we should launch, what is the entry point. It is the main activity. That main activity is then loaded, which is essentially just Kotlin code, but we call the onCreate, we're overriding the onCreate lifecycle method, which runs as soon as the app is started. And in here, we're adding a little bit of functionality to inflate our layout. We use layout inflation to inflate this specific layout. And it's all of this that sort of works together to make the app appear on our screen. And so what I'd like to do now is take a little bit closer look into this layout file. So I'm going to come over to my layout file. So here it is, activity-main.xml. The first thing I'm going to say is we're going to spend a lot more time diving into layouts, but for now, we're just going to get kind of an overview. So let's note that right here we have a palette that is where we can pick potential views to put into our app. So we have some commonly used ones, we have different text views, button views, different layouts, etc. A view is a base class for all user interface components, all UI components. Everything that we put onto our layout is going to be a view. And so you see these views that we can choose from right here. Now, if we look below our palette, we have something called the component tree. Our component tree is going to sort of list how our views are laid out in the app. So right now it looks like we have two views. We have a constraint layout and a text view. So the constraint layout is going to sort of define how the views are going to be positioned in the layout. And so we can work with different layouts. If we look, we have constraint layouts. I have a horizontal linear layout and a vertical linear layout. And then whatever I nest inside of this view, whatever's nested inside of this view, like the text view, is going to abide by the rules of that layout. And so I have one view nested in my layout. It is a text view, and it simply says hello world. And let's zoom in right there so we can really see it. So now if I click this text view, whether it's here or just right in my app, I open up an attributes panel or an attributes tab on the right. And this is where I can change many attributes of the view. So even like if I can click the constraint layout, I get an attributes for the constraint layout. If I click the text view, I get attributes of the text view. And so, I don't know, let's change some of the attributes here of this text view. So I'm going to scroll down, and don't worry, we're going to talk a lot about these attributes. Let's change the text. So right now it says hello world, and I'm going to have it say hello world, the art of doing CS rules. And we'll say that, right? And so when I do this, if you notice here, I get a big yellow glowing box here, and it looks like I get a warning. And let's see what the warning says. The warning says we're using a hard-coded string. So we should instead use a string resource, right? And we talked about string resources. String resources are pretty good. They're over here in our resources file. And right now I only have one string resource. So I guess I could type out my string resource, right? I could do it just, right here. I could say name is equal to, I'll call it title string. And I'll say, I don't know. What do I want to say? I'll say hello world, the art of doing CS rules. A little shameless self-promotion, right? So I can type that out, and now if I come over to my layout in here, all I need to do is just reference that string. So I'll do @string title string. And look at that, it appears right there. So I can call that string resource. There's another way that we can do this. So let me just show you how to do it, because I'll probably do it maybe this way more often. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to actually delete this string resource now. So that string resource is gone. I should have an error in my... Oh, I don't actually have an error, right? It just actually prints out @string title resource. So what I'm going to do, if I want to create the string resource right here in the attributes tab, I'm just going to click this button right here to the right of the text, and I'm going to come to add and string value. And I'll call this title string. I have to give it a resource name and then my value. So I'll say hello world, the art of doing CS rules. All right, and so now I can click OK, and now I've created that string right here. I can select it and click OK, and now we have that back. While we're here, we can do it, some other little formatting. I don't know. Let's see. We can Like, let's change the text size so I can just scroll through, and we'll talk more about this. I don't know, let's make it 30. We'll make it a little bit bigger. I can center it, etc. So that looks pretty nice. Now, we've done all of these changes here in the design editor of our layout, but I can also, if I click this code here, I can change them using XML code. And so we'll work, originally we're going to start with the design tab, but eventually we'll move into editing using the XML code. Why don't we change the color of the text view here in XML code? So you can see in my XML, it looks like I have my constraint layout. This is my first view. And then nested inside of it, I have a text view. So there's my second view. So I'm going to go inside of my text view. I want to change the color of the text. And I'm just going to start typing text. And you can see I get like auto-completes. And so I'm going to use text color. And I think we have a nice color resource that we've already created, right? The My Theme color, which is that hot pink. So I'm going to set that. And why don't we also set the background color of this? So I'll type in background. And we can do Android background, and we'll just do black. So black is a color that's, I think it's already defined, right? It should be. If we come over to our colors, yep, black is defined right here, so we can type that in. And so now, where'd my layout go? So now I wrote that in XML. If I come over to our design tab, we see that change has taken place. We can also write the code and see the changes at the same time using split. So again, you can make the changes via XML, or you can make them via the design tab. I think they're both gonna, we'll use both, but we'll pretty much start with the design tab. So let's upload this. Let's just see our new layout in action on our device. And then we're going to do one last thing here with this layout file. So the Gradle build is running. All right. And we should see this look pretty cool, right? I don't know. Maybe you're a fan of the 80s. I think the 80s are pretty popular, right? So I click Hello World. And there we have it. Hello World, the art of doing CS rules. So I don't think it looks great, but it sort of shows some of the attributes that we can change. So one of the last things I want to do is say, what happens if we create an entirely new layout file? Well, let's see. So we know that in our main activity, it's setting and inflating the layout in the onCreate method. So let's see if we can create a new layout file and inflate it properly. So to create a new layout file, I'm going to come over here to Layout. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to New. And we'll do layout resource file. And I'm just going to call it test. That's all. I'm just going to call it the test layout because we're going to delete this eventually. And so we're presented with a constraint layout. I'm going to drag a view in here. I don't know. What do I want to drag? Let's drag a button. So I'm going to put a button into my view. And so there's a button. If you notice, look at the color of the button. It's our default theme primary color, which is kind of cool. We're going to get a couple of errors here. You can just to fix these, and don't worry. This is because we're using a constraint layout. I'm just going to drag to the left. And I'm going to drag to the top, and that should make a change. And why don't we also, the text says button. Ugh, I don't like that. Let's change it to our string resource that we created. So I'm going to come down here to attributes. Under common attributes, I'm going to say @ we have a nice string resource called title string. And so there we have it, the Hello World, the art of doing CS rules. So this is kind of nice. There's our button. And so let's run this layout, and let's upload it to our device. So I'll click Run. And we should be all set here. So let's see. Hopefully when this installs, we should see this new layout file appear when we launch our app. Okay, so let's take a look. I'm going to do terminate here. And it should open right up. It's launching. And what we see is we have the old layout still present. So why is that? Well, if you think about it, right, we said in the Android manifest, we're referencing the main activity as the entry point of the app. In our main activity, we're then inflating our layout, and we're still inflating the old layout, the old activity main. So what I need to do is put my correct layout in here. So r.layout.test, and there is the new layout. And so if we run this now, this should work much better. So we'll just take a look here. And we'll make sure that this works, and then I think we're just going to delete this test layout. Just for testing purposes, we're doing this, making sure we understand what's going on in these default files that Android Studio creates for us. And so there we have it. There's our nice button that I can click. Of course, this button does nothing, right? And we're going to learn in the future how to change that button. One of the things that I want to just quickly say is, why is it nice to use string resources? Well, if you look, we have two layout files, right? And they both say the same thing. They're both referencing the same string. We can now come over to the string, and if we want to change this, we'll say the art of doing, and I'm going to CS, and I'll say Android rules. So I'm going to add the word Android, and as soon as I do that, we get a nice change here, the change occurs, and we get a nice change here, the change occurs. So we only have to make that change once, and then the change appears in multiple places. What I'm going to do now, I don't want this test layout, so I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to delete, and we'll say delete. And if you look here, it says it's searching for tests. So this is kind of nice. It's searching for this layout file to find usages to see if we're using it. And it's going to let us know if we are. And it tells you right here, we have one problem, right? There's one usage of this, and so it's not safe to delete. So I can click View Usage, and it tells me right here, potential usage in my main activity in my onCreate. So right, I'm still referencing that code. You can delete it anyway, but it's nice that this tells you. So I'm going to come over to my main activity. Let's get rid of the old layout and we'll put activity main. And now I should be able to delete this with no problem. So we'll delete that. It searches. And it's done. Okay, so this is like a really great place to stop, I think. We now kind of have seen the manifest at work. We've seen the main activity at work, and we have messed around with our layout as well. One last thing that I'd like to do here in kind of this exploratory set of videos with Android Studio is look a little bit more at some of these lifecycle methods, such as onCreate, when they run, why they run, and how they run. And I think that'll give us a really solid foundation that we can build upon as we start designing our own apps. So I'll see you in that next video. One of the last things I'd like to do with this set of videos here is learn how to use the log system to get a better understanding of the default lifecycle methods of our activity. We already said that there's an onCreate method here that runs when the activity is initially created. This is where we should initialize all crucial elements of our activity, such as the layout. And there are other default lifecycle methods as well, like onStart or onStop or onDestroy. And we can override each method such that our app will do what we want it to do when the user performs one of these, default actions. To get a better understanding of when these methods are called, we're going to use the logcat. Learning how to use logcat will help us in debugging our errors in the future as we encounter them. The logcat displays system messages, and it allows us to display our own messages in real time using the log class. The log class is what allows us to essentially create our messages in logcat. So you can see logcat right here, and wow, it's like just a constant stream of information. But don't worry, we can filter through this, and we'll see how in a moment. So let's just check. In our onCreate, let's use the log. So we're going to say use logcat to see when lifecycle method runs. Okay, so in order to do this, I'm going to call the log class log, and now I'm going to pass .i because we are going to, oh, and did you see how it was red initially there? Because it wasn't imported, but remember we set auto imports to, we turned on auto import, so it automatically imported the log class for us here. So log, and we're going to call .i because we're going to put like an informative log. And in here, what we need are two strings. The first string is going to be our tag that we can use to filter through the log messages. You saw there was a constant stream of information, so we're going to put the word test, and then next is what we want to log. So I'm going to put in here, I'll say onCreate initiated, moving to onStart. Okay, so there we have it. There's my log. So now if I run this, let's run this and just test. So I'm running it. Again, my device is my physical device right here. It's going to build it. You can use your physical device if you have one. You can use your virtual device if you have one. It should work the same regardless here, right? So while that's running, okay, it's going to install. We're going to open it up. It's launching the activity right here. There we have it. If I open up the logcat, you can see I've got a lot of information here. I can filter through this by typing in the tag that I used. So what was our tag? Our tag was test. And so if I type test here, we see onCreate initiated, moving to onStart. And so there, our log has been sent to this logcat so we can view it. Now, what happens if I go home, right? I back out of my app and then, I don't know, maybe I click here to reopen it. Well, if you notice, it wasn't logged again. It's only logged when the app is created because it's found in the onCreate method. If I come here and I close all of my apps, all right, and now I launch this again, then the onCreate method is going to run again, and we should see that message getting logged again. So there it is, right? It just got relogged. So perfect, okay? So I think this is really nice here, and we're going to use this log system to take a closer look at some of the other default lifecycle methods. Now, I think maybe like a drawing is really going to help us understand these different lifecycle methods. So here's a nice drawing of the different lifecycle methods. As soon as we launch our icon, right? So imagine we hit the button, we launch our icon. What we run is the onCreate lifecycle method. So we said, this is called right when the app starts, right when your main activity is loaded, and it only runs once. As soon as this is done, as soon as it's done, the onStart method is called. And this is when essentially the activity becomes visible to the user. So the user can see things on the screen now. And as soon as that is done, this next lifecycle method, onResume, automatically gets called. And so this is called just before the user can start interacting with the app. And so this means essentially like the app has the focus of the device. So these three methods are sort of called one right after the other. So onCreate, onStart, and onResume. And then we sit here in onResume for a while as we use our app until onPause is called. And onPause is called when the activity loses focus. So your activity may still be visible, but it doesn't have the focus. For instance, like maybe the user taps the back button or the recents button on their phone or tablet. And so once we're here, one of two things can happen. If the user goes back to the app, onResume will be called, or if the user puts the app in the background, onStop will be called. And so this is like, when I put the app in the background, it was still open, it was still running, but it wasn't visible to the user. So onStop is called. And here, when onStop is called, one of two things can happen. The user can reopen the app like we did, in which onRestart is called. And when onRestart is called, automatically, once that's finished, we go back to onStart. You saw we didn't go back to onCreate. We didn't have to recreate the app. We just went to onStart. And then we repeat the life cycle. Or if we're on here in onStop, we can actually close out the app, and then we run onDestroy, which is called when the activity is destroyed, and essentially the life cycle ends. So this is kind of a nice representation of these life cycle methods, right? Here we're born, and I guess here we die, and we can kind of go back and forth. Black here represents something that automatically happens, and orange is maybe representative of like it's waiting. Okay, so it's paused. So let's use logcat now to override each of the default life cycles, and we can sort of see how they work. So let's see. I'll put a comment here in our main activity. So we're going to do this in our main activity class, but outside of the onCreate. So we'll just say override all life cycle methods to learn about them. Cool. Exclamation, right? So we'll say override function. We'll do on start next. So we'll say on start. And we're going to extend it, of course. So we're going to call super.onStart. We don't want to completely get rid of this. And now we're going to put our log message. So I'm going to actually just copy my log message right here and paste it. And instead of saying onCreate, we're going to say onStart initiated, moving to onResume. So there is like our nice override. In fact, we're going to be doing this time and time again. So why don't I just copy this and paste it, and instead of overriding onStart, we're going to override onResume next. And so we're going to call super.onResume. So we can extend this. And our log here is going to say onResume initiated. And now if we check out our diagram, right, when we're in onResume, we're now going to wait for onPause. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to say waiting for onPause. All right, waiting for onPause. Okay, so now let's override onPause. So I'm going to just paste this, and we'll say instead of onStart here, we have onPause. We want to extend onPause, so we'll say super.onPause. And then our log here is going to say onPause initiated, moving to, so let's just check. It's either moving to onStop, waiting for onStop, or waiting for onResume. So we'll say waiting for onStop or onResume. So we'll put that in there, and hopefully we'll see this as we do our logs, right, as we test this. All right, we've already got onResume, so let's do onStop. So we'll override function onStop, and we're going to extend onStop, and our log message will say onStop initiated. And so what happens here? Well, if we look with onStop, we're waiting for onDestroy or onRestart. So we'll say waiting for onDestroy or onRestart. And so now we just got to do those last two, right? So we're moving pretty quickly here with these, but it's pretty much all the same stuff, right? So we'll say onRestart, and we're going to extend. So super.onRestart, and our tag will say onRestart initiated moving to. And so where do we go after onRestart? We are sent right to onStart, right? So as soon as onRestart's done, we go to onStart. So say moving to onStart. And then last but not least, we just have to do onDestroy. So we'll say onDestroy, and we're going to extend from super.onDestroy, and our log message here will read onDestroy initiated, and then I guess we'll just say, what do we want to say after that? The app has been killed. All right. Sad face, right? A little bit of humor. Okay, so there are all of our overrides to the default lifecycle methods. Okay, so we have the onCreate right in here, and then we've got all of our other ones. So let's run this, and let's use logcat to sort of see how we can interact and sort of, see how these lifecycle methods are called when we run our app. So let's see. This is going to upload here. Okay, it's installing. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to go to the logcat. We're filtering already for tests, so I'm going to actually just bring this up a bit. And so you can see right off the bat what's called. Well, we said it looks like onCreate is called, and it's initiated, and it's moving to onResume. I'll move this over here. Then onStart, and then onStart was initiated, moving to onResume, and onResume was initiated. And now it's just waiting, right? It's waiting for onPause. So we can do a bunch of stuff in our app. And if I don't know, do this, then it says onPause was initiated, waiting for onStop or onResume, and it looks like onStop was initially called, waiting for onDestroy or onRestart. So right now it's stuck in the onStop state. So the app is still going, but it's just in the background. Doesn't have focus. So if I click this again, what are we going to see? Well, we should go to onRestart. And so let's see, onRestart was initiated, moving to onStart. OnStart was initiated, moving to onResume. OnResume was initiated, waiting for onPause. But if you notice, the onCreate wasn't called there, okay? So that's pretty nice. And now let's put this in the background again. So we're waiting for onPause. I'm going to send it to onPause. All right. It was initiated, waiting for onStop or onResume, and it went to onStop. And so now we're waiting for either onDestroy or onRestart. Let's actually destroy it. So I'm going to close all. And oh, onDestroy did not run. I wonder why onDestroy didn't run. DS onDestroy. Let's just try this one more time. So I'm going to launch this app again. We should see the onCreate. Good, onCreate's getting called. So, right, that's the only time it should be called. And so now let's put this in the background and let's destroy it. Huh, it still didn't get called. Let's destroy it from here. Okay. So there's that, and then let's close this out. Well, I don't know why onDestroy is not getting called. I can't figure it out. It should be getting called. Maybe it got called for you. Maybe I have a silly mistake and I'm just not seeing it. But regardless, imagine that the onDestroy log was logged to the screen right here. And so I think this gives us a really good idea of how these lifecycle methods work and when they run. So see, these are some of the default methods of our activities that we can work with. So I think this sort of ends our overview, our introduction. I think we have a really solid foundation that we can build upon moving forward for the rest of our course here. So I can't wait to see you in those upcoming videos.